Warning: this video will contain some spoilers of Elden Ring. I will try to keep them to a minimum, and I will not show any specific mid or late game bosses. I will discuss one of them vaguely enough that new players can't glean anything from it. But those who know, yeah, they know. Consider this your spoiler warning for the rest of the video. So here's a spicy take. I think Elden Ring is kind of decent, actually. If I have to be honest, it's been pretty all-consuming, and I've absolutely loved every second of it. It's actually pretty wonderful logging onto Steam and seeing my entire friends list filled up with, "is playing Elden Ring." Except that guy. So, I've, over the course of a month, played Elden Ring to the fullest extent I could. I've explored more or less every nook and cranny, or at least it feels like it. I've gotten every ending, and I've gotten every achievement. And now, I want to talk about it. First things first, I am floored by the way they've managed to preserve the Souls experience, while also going full open world with tons of things to explore. Usually when games go open world, there are usually a ton of concessions that need to be made. Zelda goes open world with Breath of the Wild, and you suddenly have 4 short temples and tons of shrines that kinda look the same. The enemy variety took a nosedive with not that many different types of enemies, and only different coloration that mixed things up. And while it is cool that you have roaming bosses in the world, there are only so many Hinoxes and Taluses I can fight before they get a little stale. The main things to find in the overworld are the Korok seeds and the armor sets. The weapons are nice too, but they break like crazy. Now don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved everything about Breath of the Wild back in 2017, and I still think it's a great time. But it didn't take too long for the game to fall into a familiar rhythm, so to speak. It's not like exploration fatigue or anything. I loved exploring. I just kind of knew what to expect 90% of the time. Pinwheel in the forest? Korok seed. Stone circle? Korok seed. A ball and chain? Korok seed. A block puzzle? Yup, Korok seed. Accordion music? Cass, and then maybe a shrine afterwards. There's nothing wrong with that, but that meant that the main drive for the exploratory crowd, like me, had to be carried by the sights you see, the puzzles and the shrines, and the novelty of the highly reactive systems like temperature, fire, gravity, and so on. Because the rewards themselves weren't usually mind-blowing. Many people have said that Breath of the Wild is a wonderful game, but it might have lost a little bit of its Zelda DNA along the way. This illustrates the point that when a series goes open world, it's not always easy to keep the spirit recognizable enough that fans end up loving it the same way as before. What blows me away with Elden Ring is that it isn't half an open world game and half a Souls game. It somehow actually manages to be a complete open world game while also being a complete Souls game at the same time. It really feels like a culmination of everything that came before it, and I wonder if the recent news of Breath of the Wild 2 being delayed is because they wanted to incorporate some lessons they learned from Elden Ring. And it's not like it doesn't take a few shortcuts either. There are reskinned enemies with slight variations, and even reused bosses. But even then, the sheer number of enemies and bosses already dwarf the amount found in Zelda. Even at 170 hours into my 185-hour playthrough of Elden Ring, I was still finding secret areas with new bosses and significant lore implications about different endings to the game and such. Plus, jaw-dropping scenery and varied weaponry, armor sets and such that genuinely had me looking forward to every new thing I found. It's wild. The amount of equipment with new cool effects, the vast assortment of summonable spirits or ashes of war or spells or incantations or NPC quest lines that end prematurely because you let Pee-Pee Poo-Poo Man out of his sewer cell and now some shrimp seller on the other side of the fucking continent is dead is absolutely incredible. You're also really never overwhelmed by the game because, unlike other classic open world games where you have to find like radio towers and get your map littered with icons, Elden Ring doesn't reveal shit until you actually go exploring and find it on your own. This makes exploring its own reward instead of giving you what is essentially a spreadsheet with various checkmarks to complete. The drive to explore becomes intrinsic instead of extrinsic, and that just keeps driving my motivation to continue exploring. There are several points where you just have a wow, this game is big epiphany, and it never stops getting old. When you find the Siofra well is probably going to be your first size realization, but the seeds are sown way sooner than just that. Look at the first time you step outside and you see Limgrave sprawling ahead of you. Just this spot here is so damn good. Boom, you see your first sight of Grace out in the overworld. You see your first NPC, you see your first obstacle, you see your first close landmark, you see your first intended path, you see the massive Erd tree dominating the landscape, but even then you can still see some more details. You can see the capital here, you can see not one but two divine towers, and you can even see this little structure here, which is going to be very important at the latest stages of the game. And that's just a view from opening the door. Turn your camera to the side and you can see the Bestial Sanctuary, Fort Faroche, and so on. In that regard, it is very similar to Breath of the Wild's world, where it very early on shows you how big the world is and lets you know you can explore there. There's always something new to find, and even when Elden Ring reuses some area aesthetics or dungeon layouts, you're so spoiled for new content everywhere that seeing a catacomb, which reminds me a little bit of the Bloodborne Chalice dungeons, somewhat becomes a familiar little break from all the other new stuff. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. That being said, we can put a little pin in this for now. An interesting discussion that spurred amongst my friend group was if Dark Souls have now become superannuated by Elden Ring. Essentially, is Elden Ring so good that you can't really go back to the Dark Souls or Bloodborne style of games? I'd say absolutely not. Elden Ring is fantastic through and through, but there's absolutely something to be said about a tightly paced game with more limited and linear progression like the previous Soulsborne games. I've seen my friends play the game and some of them get so distracted and sidetracked by other things in the overworld that they never really get anything done, and the moment an area or a boss gives them any kind of resistance, they just kind of go do other things. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, but since the game is so dense, if you're not structured and mark your map, you could end up forgetting where you've been and what you didn't finish fully. If you got a short attention span, this game could possibly be a nightmare. Or you could also have the time of your life going from one thing to the other. Who knows? I mean, as long as you're enjoying yourself, who am I to say otherwise? Thankfully, a recent patch added NPC markers, so you wouldn't have to mark everything. But I still think that while utterly fantastic, I don't think that the previous games have been superannuated yet. I'd actually say it's a little bit like comparing apples to oranges. They're different enough, and the tight pacing of previous titles makes the experience flow so well. Also makes the bosses feel super unique when they only show up once in the game as opposed to being reused so many times like in Elden Ring. So yeah, let's address this pin right now. I mentioned that Elden Ring reuses bosses and dungeon layouts, and I don't mind the layouts as much, but Elden Ring has around 150 to 160 bosses as of right now, depending on how you count them. They're absolutely not all unique, and most of these could be chalked up to being all different species of bosses, like the different dragons or the tree spirits. Or they're just later stage enemies showing up as early dungeon bosses. I do think that this is a smart way of doing it, because it's always fun to see a previous big boss who gave you trouble now just be a regular old enemy. But I do think they might have overdone it just a tad. In the beginning, everything was new and mind-boggling. Exploration was extremely rewarding and novel, but as I was nearing the end, I was starting to feel like I was rewarded for exploring just a little less. I'd learned so much that I kind of knew what to expect when it came to mines, catacombs, minor Erd trees, and the like. I was still having fun exploring, just like I did with Breath of the Wild, but man, the final overworld area didn't feel like it had all too much to explore either. And with how it severely messes up your vision, it's also somewhat hard to explore. I wasn't given any particularly cool sights to see, and the Grace Fire Lanterns felt like they were a bit fewer and further between. I'm not sure if it's exploration fatigue, or if it was just that the difficulty of the last areas felt a bit exhausting, because I could easily go back and discover new things in the previous areas just fine. So I think it's honestly just an issue with the last parts not getting quite the same crafted quality as the first 90% of the game. Though, it might be too early to say, it hasn't stewed long enough yet. Now, what isn't too early to say is that this game does exploration really well for the most part. I think it's an absolutely amazing world that From Software has built, and I cannot wait for VaatiVidya to explain what the fuck I just played, because there's just so much lore that I can't piece it together into a cohesive narrative without at least 1 or 2 hot and steamy nights with a wiki. This game also, it tries its best on PC, to put it nicely. It stutters more than I did back in middle school, and it crashes more than a drunk driver who can't remember what the steering wheel did anymore. Look at this.
That was quite a performance.
Hopefully they can patch this soon, but know that if you've got a PC and your relationship with Elden Ring ends on a sour note because of the performance, I understand you completely. This should have been better at launch, and I hope it improves soon. 2 more things I want to touch on that I think could be improved are the crafting systems and the leveling system. Crafting first. It is absolutely not bad in theory. There are tons of options, you can craft anywhere, and you have unlimited inventory space. Animal Crossing! And now that I think about it, there are so many awesome quality of life features with this game that it's genuinely hard to believe that this is FromSoft's first attempt at an open world. But I digress. The one big problem I have with it is that I don't really use it a lot, other than to craft certain throwable bots. And even then, most of them use FP, so I'm a bit discouraged to use those too. This makes it feel a little bad to go through a rough area or stumble through a really hidden secret and find that your reward for doing so was another incredibly rare arterial leaf. Actually, maybe I'll just find some literal shit too. Thankfully, like I mentioned, the game's exploration is still absolutely intrinsically motivated, so the lame mushroom tier rewards don't hurt too much, especially with all the other things you can find that are very much worth it. But it's still one of those things that leave a slightly sour taste in your mouth for just a moment. Then again, as the game ages, people might be able to figure out some more amazing stuff about the game and how to really utilize the crafting system like they did with Sekiro's tools. In the beginning, nobody knew, for instance, that the Guardian Ape takes a ton of posture damage when you use a spear in the second phase, for instance. And I'm already kinda seeing it happen with Elden Ring. There's a certain tall boy, fat boy duo boss where you can apparently put one of them to sleep for a whole minute, making a tough fight quite manageable. So, who knows? Maybe my current complaint isn't as bad a year down the line. The other issue I have is with the leveling system. Or perhaps it's a game balancing issue? In the beginning, I remember feeling like everything could one-shot me, and I felt like everything took quite a while to get a decent build going. In the mid-game, everything still felt like it could one-shot me, but I had gotten a decent build going, and turtling behind my shield became my problem solver until I could do something a bit more fun than just that. Finally, towards the end of the game, I had hit the soft caps for almost all my stats, and I needed around 200,000 soul rune echoes to level up. Yet, everything still one-shotted me or killed me in a combo I couldn't really get out of once the first hit connected. It kinda made me wonder what the point of leveling vigor was at all. I've heard sentiments that they should probably reduce damage a bit across the board, and I think that sounds about right, though I wouldn't mind upping the boss HP to make up for the less damage they deal. I won't spoil it, but there is a boss fight at the end where you're having a super rad sword duel and you could be doing great at it, struggling a bit, learning the moveset and finding the few points where you can punish attacks, having an absolute blast. But then the boss decides to use what I can only describe as revving up a steel-edged Beyblade with a Dremel. And if you get caught in the move, you're pretty much dead. The boss, for me, ended up being a fight against that one move, not necessarily the rest of the boss. And that is a little bit of a shame considering how cool she is to fight otherwise. But man, I must sound like I hate the game since I've got so much negative to say about it, but no, it's quite the opposite. I think this game is absolutely phenomenal and is a super easy recommendation from me. I think it needs a bit of better balancing, and I wish the rewards in the overworld were more tied to the customization needle you get, instead of some of these mundane mushrooms you find, because customization could be super duper cool, had it not just been the remove cape feature. But other than these issues, I cannot get enough of Elden Ring. Its creativity has had me audibly gasp several times. Its scope and its beautiful marriage of different gameplay styles make me think this game is truly a jack of all trades and a master of most. Even the first legacy dungeon, Stormvale Castle, had me in awe when I found out how this game demanded you use platforming to explore the areas, and when I found the secret underneath it all. No, please stop me. I could go on for hours upon hours about this game. In fact, ask me about it in the comments. I will start gushing about it. This game feels like it was made by artists, visionaries. They have taken a few shortcuts, but most of them are understandable, and I believe it serves the game well for the most part. The experience is so strong in the beginning and the mid-game, and the world doesn't feel tiring to explore at all, barring perhaps the last area. It feels big, dense, and well-crafted. While the other games are even more tightly paced, this one still does retain a lot of the classic experience in its legacy dungeons. There aren't even any microtransactions or battle passes. And the game was even co-written by George Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones. And while people are mostly unsure what parts he wrote and what parts other people wrote, I think it's pretty clear that his contributions were obviously the various messages you find strewn along the game world. Fortnite. Good one, Georgie!